All right. So you're talking about the guidelines, the treatment guidelines, right?
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about that. What is it that determines on a broad level whether or not somebody is a good candidate for TRT?
So the key would be, just looking at someone's history, a physical examination. The key point is to, establish that there is that there are baseline symptoms here. Is somebody showing signs of erectile dysfunction? Have they, lost the spontaneous morning?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm talking about? Those sorts of, maybe uncomfortable things to talk about. Those are the most glaring signs of a testosterone deficiency.
Okay.
So, certainly mood plays into that as well. More of the specific ones that we talked about. Things
like metabolic syndrome, insulin sensitivity, or weight gain. Those are not, the first thought isn't low testosterone. If for 90% of the people that ask me, that's what they're thinking about. Right.
But
that shouldn't be the first thought is what you're saying.
It should not be.
Okay.
It should not be. Because in a perfect world, if you begin to correct those things, that we know that can have an effect on testosterone levels. You know what I mean? If someone's obstructive sleep apnea is an issue and it's untreated, we know for a fact that can boost someone's serum testosterone. But before we kind of get lost in that, you have symptoms. The doctor, your doctor has a good reason based upon those symptoms and a physical exam that, all right, we'll do some blood work. So what they'll do is they'll look at a morning fasting total testosterone, and the guideline doesn't specify the time, I believe, but in most places, 8 a.m. is a good bet. And that's something to keep in mind. Fasted 8 a.m. Testosterone serum concentrations, they follow a diurnal variation.
Okay.
And so they're higher in the morning, lower at the end of the day. And so they're upwards of like 30% higher in the morning.
Wow.
So that's critical. If you get 3 measurements taken and they're all late in the day and you're coming up low, then you potentially take that information with a grain of salt.
Or a classic situation where, hey, and maybe it's totally by coincidence, but you get your level checked and maybe you're not, quite low, but you're borderline, and you happen to get that test in the morning. That's when your work schedule worked out. And then you get tested again 6 months later. It happens to be in the afternoon and your level's lower. There may have been no physiological reason for that other than those diurnal rhythms. So I know Dante had more to say there, but I think that's a critical piece because that can be something just random and coincidental would have dramatic effect on how your treatment.
So hopefully your practitioner's paying attention to that.
Yes.
And you said fasted. Does diet have something to do with testosterone levels?
Yes. So your current nutrition status, glucose, all those sorts of things can change, how your testosterone might fluctuate on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah,
so the point is it's just easier to control as many variables as you can.
Absolutely. Right.
So you measure morning serum testosterone. If there is a low, if it does come up low, which 300 nanograms per deciliter, we'll call it.
300 nanograms, you were below it or above that?
Below it.
Okay, so if you're below 300 nanograms per deciliter, they would do a second reading just to confirm?
Yes. And again, to reiterate the key points, they would do it in the morning, likely fasted, just to keep all variables the same.
Right.
Again, testosterone follows that diurnal variation. You want to get the morning measurement, which is critical. If that reading also is low, then you can essentially confirm the presence of low testosterone in that case. Now there's much more to it than that. Even.
Of course.
So there are situations where you would want to look at someone's free testosterone as well. And so testosterone doesn't just float around in the blood on its own.
Okay.
The majority of it is bound to something called sex hormone binding globulin.
Okay.
And that proportion of the testosterone is rendered inactive, we'll call it. And then the remaining portion, or the free testosterone, is, again, the free testosterone, which is actually floating freely. Plus there's some testosterone bound to albumin. There's some that's bound to other carriers related to the adrenals,
Mhm.
and that makes up a very low percentage. But you have this, the SHBG portion, which is inactive, and then you have this other portion, which is actually what they now consider the bioactive or the bioavailable portion of testosterone.
Okay.
And there are many different health conditions and situations where someone's sex hormone binding globulin could be super elevated or it could be super low, and that throws off the total measurement.
Oh,
And
so if it's
so-
binding more than it should be, because there's more of the sex
Exactly.
hormone binding globulin, then
It can give you a skewed reading. And so that's a great example of where free testosterone is incredibly useful.
Okay.
Now, the problem is depending on the lab, depending on a multitude of factors, it's just a little more difficult to get a free testosterone level that you're super confident in.
Sure.
Now, granted, these sorts of tests have come a long way, but this measurement can actually be measured,
Mhm.
or it can just be calculated based upon some of the other values. And so, just kind of an interesting tidbit there. So, not everybody really needs needs this free T measurement. Again, it is more geared towards somebody who they might feel has some changes in the sex hormone binding globulin. So somebody with type 2 diabetes is a situation where that's a good example of where it would be different. But there's a laundry list of conditions
Okay.
in that case.
So it's not everybody, even if your testosterone level is low, it not everyone is a good candidate necessarily for the free T measurement.
It's just, I'm sure that your doctor would probably just measure it anyway.
Right. Because
It's
already
just a part of
doing
a battery of tests. It's just that it's probably going to tell you the same thing that the total testosterone is, unless again, there's some other reason to believe that you need to look at that a little more closely.
Okay.
And so for example, in addition to, I'm glad you said that, because in addition to the SHBG, you would also want to look at free testosterone for somebody who's maybe borderline low. And so you're looking at, and there are a couple other measures that we would want to look at as well. But somebody who does have a borderline measure, maybe right around 300, maybe just below 300,
Mhm.
you can look at free testosterone to confirm, or you look at, or in that case, you would look at the bioavailable, the bioactive form of testosterone to then guide your decision as well.
okay.
So
All right.
so it can be very nuanced in and of that one measurement.
Obviously.
And then also in this battery of tests, you are also going to measure luteinizing hormone and FSH, which we started talking about a little bit. Those are responsible for ultimately the downline production of testosterone and the downline production of spermatogenesis. So
Okay.
the production of sperm in the testes. So that's even where kind of the fertility tie-in lies. But both of those hormones, which are released from ultimately the pulsatile release of that gonadotropin releasing hormone, those will then loop us back to how do we distinguish this as primary or secondary hypogonadism. Once we looked at the symptoms, once we looked at the free testosterone, the total testosterone, got us to this point, looked at LH, looked at FSH, now we can begin to understand what's causing this.
Okay. So what are the different forms in terms of how would it be administered? You guys have a compounding pharmacy, and I know that that's critical. Why is that critical to this? This isn't just a pill that's produced?
Yeah, you do not take oral testosterone itself, essentially because the liver will inactivate it. So
okay.
you essentially need to do it parenterally, which is basically injection, or transdermally. Transdermal can certainly have some variation. Ideally, what does occur whenever you apply it transdermally, it gets into the stratus corpuscle, and it's a little bit of a reservoir there to be able to release it throughout the day. But it's going to give you a little more even levels potentially, but also maybe a little less predictable levels than injections do.
Okay.
Injections have been shown to have a little bit of, especially with testosterone enanthate, a little bit of peaks and troughs. So there's just, again, something to watch out for. In the most basic sense, do you want to avoid a needle? Or on the other way, do you want to avoid having to do something every day? Maybe you forget. So a lot of it does come down to how do you feel after you take it? What's more convenient for you? A daily non-injection or a less frequent, weekly, bi-weekly injection?
Okay. All right. Wow. All right. That's fascinating. I had no idea about so much of this. You said, so they, if they're supplementing, whether they're injecting or they're using a patch, there's constant monitoring, trying to get that level back to normal. So you start treatment and you go, I don't know, a few weeks, a few months, check again. If it's not where it should be, then you up the levels. If it's too high, then you drop the levels. Is that the idea?
I would say so. Yeah.
Okay.
I think a lot of people, at least from what we see on the pharmacy end too, is that there's some dose titration that has to occur. And so if you're doing 100 milligrams intramuscularly once a week, maybe that's enough for some people. For others, that's not enough. They got to go up to 200 or 150. And
it's not just as simple as my level was 200 nanograms per deciliter, so I need 100. It's more complex than that and has to do with how your body responds.
Yeah, there's a lot that goes into that.
Okay.
How the drug is released, how much you're actually absorbing. I don't know that I can answer that exactly. But there's not like
it's not simple math.
That like a certain dose is guaranteed to move at a certain level.
Right.
no.
Okay. You guys sound exactly alike sometimes. It's very funny. All right. So we're treating it and we're getting it back into the normal range. Once we start treatment, once we get that testosterone, free testosterone and the bound testosterone to where it should be, I'm feeling good. Maybe I'm losing weight. I'm able to exercise more, yada, yada, yada. Is this perpetual for the rest of my life, or is my body going to jumpstart and get itself back into shape?
That is as a part of deciding whether or not, when you originally get this or worked up for low testosterone, let's say, once you've determined that this is an option, the additional layer that goes into this kind of shared decision-making with your provider is the understanding that this is going to be likely a lifelong endeavor.
Okay.
Which isn't the end of the world per se. I know that thought is scary for some people. Oh my goodness, I'm going to have to do this forever. But when you think about what's physiologically happening, I think there's some reassurance that it just is what it is. All you're doing is supplementing, what your body is already making.
Especially because the body's working on feedback in this case.
Right.
So once you do start giving it, it's much harder to unwind. Now, again, there's nuance, like we keep saying to all this. Somebody's, again, high alcohol user, opiates, very sedentary, extremely overweight, those things, you change major variables, and maybe testosterone is part of a process to get you through that. It's a possibility, but it becomes very difficult once you kind of open. And I think that also goes into why it is such a big decision. It's not just, I'm a little down, I'm a little fatigued, I'm a little overweight. Throw me on some testosterone. It's more nuanced for those reasons, because once you open that can of worms, it's very hard to put them back in.
Yeah. If you're truly hypogonadal, I don't see any situation where you can come off testosterone.
Right. That makes sense.
Because if it's related to sleep apnea, if it's related to obesity, if it's related to all these sorts of things, if those things are addressed, right, then it can be changed. But and again, even with the initial lab work that's done, if some of this is pointing to, different endocrine systems, they'll even look at TSH and your thyroid hormones, and somebody will present with all of these things low, let's just say, or an elevated FSH, elevated TSH or whatever. There was a case study in one of these write-ups that addressing the underlying hypothyroidism kicked somebody back into a normal testosterone range. So the point is not to jump on Joey, but it's just that we are not jumping. Like, I just can't mentally jump to testosterone therapy, period. There's so many things that we put the cart before the horse so easily in this circumstance that it could have been a matter of addressing your thyroid hormone that helped get your testosterone back into a normal range.
And that's a big deal, because once you start, you're on it for life.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So if that wasn't the solution that needed to be in place, congratulations, you're stuck with it forever regardless. Okay. That makes more sense then, especially why people should exercise some caution before jumping to that as a solution. Should people be self-diagnosing and making these choices without talking to a doctor who knows them?
There's obviously a level of shared decision making.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no doubt, but I think the line quickly blurs. A lot of people have their mind made up, again, like we said at the outset, a lot of people have their mind made up because they've heard, and it's this pervasive idea that there's an age-related decline in testosterone. So as soon as I hit 40, 50, it's got to be related to this. All that I'm feeling is related to this issue. And not that you don't explore that, but you just need to explore that with caution. You know what I mean? You need to explore that with a practitioner that you trust. You need to be realistic about, maybe the set of underlying, comorbid conditions that you have. You need to be open about having potentially, subclinical underlying comorbid conditions that can be the driving factor of if you end up with a low serum testosterone.